There we go. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. Follow us and connect with us on social media. On YouTube, subscribe to our channel at Grade Level Reading. On LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram, follow us at Campaign for GLR. And on X, follow us at Reading by Third. Please use the hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to share anything you learn from today's conversation, and we will be sure to reshare. We encourage you to post any questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, welcome to everyone who's joining us today. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I will be working behind the scenes to help produce this webinar. Before we jump in, I just wanted to give special thank you and acknowledgement to our enterprise and programmatic funders, as well as our individual donors. Your support not only allows us to hold these vital conversations, but also helps us create meaningful opportunities to share insights, foster connections, and build the CGLR community. Thank you. I also want to give special thank you to our Leo sustaining sponsors, who you can see on this slide here. Thank you for your support and commitment as we continue our learning and engagement opportunities every Tuesday. Before we jump in, I just wanted to share a few housekeeping details with all of you. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself if you haven't done so already. So please use the chat box at the bottom of your screen to share your name, city or state, and your organization. Be sure to select everyone so that we can all see each other's chat messages, and feel free to share any thoughts, ideas, or insights throughout the duration of the webinar. All attendees are in listen-only mode, so we encourage your engagement by both utilizing the chat box for any thoughts or ideas and for posting any questions you might have in the Q&A box. Please be sure that any questions you have are put in the Q&A box instead of the chat so our panelists can keep track of those. The webinar is also being recorded, and a link to the recording, as well as all slides, bios, and resources, will be sent in a follow-up email to everyone who registered. And lastly, we will also be having a brief on-screen poll that will pop up right towards the end of the conversation. We thank you in advance for filling that out, as that helps with our commitment to continuous improvement. And before we jump in, I wanted to make sure you are aware of some of our upcoming webinars that we have through March and April. Later this afternoon, we hope that you will join us again for the next session in our series, Leveraging the Federal Education Tax Credit, Opportunities and Challenges. In today's conversation, we will be focusing on identifying and preparing scholarship granting organizations, and this session will be co-sponsored by the Alliance for Youth Thriving. So all of our many Karen Pittman fans in the audience, her partner in crime, Marita Irby, will be joining us at 3 p.m. And on March 31st, we hope you'll join us for a session within our Precursors to Success and Impact series. This conversation focusing on how Mississippi achieved literacy success for students through smart implementation. And on April 7th, we have an exciting doubleheader. First, a peer exchange at 12:30 on how United Way partners are changing the lives of Alice families and communities. And at 3 p.m., New Pathways Through School, Understanding Virtual Schools in Today's K through 12 Landscape. So, some very exciting webinars coming up, and all of those registration links will be posted in the chat so you can register and join us. And we hope to see you there. And joining you now is Michelle Hines with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading to kick us off.
Thank you so much, Sierra, and thank you all for being here. I'm Michelle Hines, the Chief Learning Officer for the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. And I want to thank all of you for being here today. As you know, this is a special invitation-only session that we do for just a couple of times a year. And I want to thank Karen Pittman for being our moderator today. And because we have such a rich conversation with so many folks joining us, I'm going to hand it over to Karen. Thanks so much. See you soon.
Thank you, Michelle. It's great to be here, and we really do have an incredible lineup of folks. So I'm going to be very fast. I'm Karen Pittman. If you don't know me, I'm the founding partner of Knowledge to Power Catalysts, co-founder with Marita Irby. Before that, we founded the Forum for Youth Investment, and did that for 30 years. And we're continuing this journey. We've also then founded the Alliance for Youth Thriving a couple years ago. And this is really an alliance that's really bringing together education, youth development, after school time, workforce development organizations into this space. And I'll go on to the next slide. But before I do that, I want to introduce, sorry, too fast. Before I talk more about what I'm doing, I'm going to introduce our panelists. They're exciting. We're going to hear, and you're going to be so thrilled to hear from Monroe Richardson from Unconstrained Kids. He is absolutely amazing. He's going to be followed with Elizabeth Anderson, who's in North Carolina with him, and the director of after school programs in North Carolina, the After School Center. And then we've got, going to the next slide, we've got Lex Abenshin from the New York Public Library Children's Program and Services, and Lisa Gurney from New America, who is founding now this new um, National Commission on Learning Ecosystems. So we really have an exciting lineup of folks who are going to talk to us about how we think differently about learning, and particularly about unconstrained learning. We're going to put up a couple of quick slides before getting started, just to give you a sense of what we mean by unconstrained learning. Too often, we just think about schools, and then we think about the random places where kids spend their time. Over the past couple of years of the Alliance for Youth Thriving, we've really been developing this picture to show us all the places where learning happens and the people, places, and possibilities that we can imagine where learning happens if we really take a full 360 view, a 365 year-round view, the days and the hours and the full year. And we really also think about learning from infancy up to young adulthood. We know now that adolescence goes up. So I know we're going to focus on young children today, but that the lessons you're going to be learning about unconstrained learning carry well into adulthood. And this is important because as we think about this, imagine the insights that we could have if we really did track where learning happens in all the places where young people spend their time. We would both understand, go on to the next slide, we'd understand the inequities that are there. Because we know there's a correlation between having limited opportunities in your school and having limited opportunities broader in your community. We would understand the full level of inequities that are present in the learning environment, the learning ecosystem. We could also then ask questions in a different way. We could ask, do high quality experiences in one setting spark learning across others? Do they build resilience and agency in young people who are facing adversity other places? Do they lead to greater growth for students who start with fewer opportunities? We have early evidence that all these things are true, but we don't, if we just look inside of the particular system that young people are in, we don't see them. And so this is a really important opportunity for us to get a mindset shift to help us understand not just learning in boxes, learning in school, learning in classrooms, learning in sports, but get behind that to understand what kind of learning is happening and how this idea of constrained and unconstrained learning is so helpful. So we're going to go on right now to listen, and you're going to be thrilled to hear from Monroe Richardson. He is so incredibly brilliant. I don't have any other word for him. He's just brilliant in what he has been able to pull together from research that's been with us for a long time, but it has not been explained well. And he's going to tell us how unconstrained learning leads to unconstrained kids and understand why we need these unconstrained environments that we find in libraries and recreation centers and museums and parks and places where young people spend their time after school programs, where young people spend their time learning more broadly and learning these unconstrained skills that will get them successful for adulthood. So, Monroe, I'm going to turn it over to you, and we're going to start the clock and enjoy ourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you to the campaign, and thank you for everyone who's here. You're all here today because charts like this bother you. Despite our best efforts, we've made far too little progress in improving reading and math outcomes for far too long. Now, it's not because of a lack of progress. Next slide. We have tried many things to improve reading outcomes. I think need another slide. Ah, here we go. And we've tried a lot of things over the decades. Okay, next slide. I think this next quote perfectly sums up the challenges of improving reading and math achievement. But the implicit promise in this quote, complex problems don't give up their secrets easily, is that there are secrets that can be discovered. And I believe if we listen carefully, research and data can whisper these secrets to us. So this quote comes from the New America Foundation. And as it describes, researchers in the learning sciences routinely make discoveries and develop new insights. But these ideas don't always make their way to the people that can use them or in ways that they can readily make sense of them. And in late 2023, I accidentally stumbled across a powerful 20-year-old insight about skill types. Now, despite reading hundreds of academic papers about literacy, I had never heard about this before. And in talking with people inside and outside of schools, it seemed like they hadn't heard about it either. Next slide. Now, before we go further, we need to stop and define what do we mean by skill. The definition you see on this screen comes from developmental psychologists. Skill is the capacity to think and act in an organized way in a specific context. Now, context can mean many things at once: physical environment, the emotional state, social support, the domain or subject area, or the specific task involved. Skill and context are intricately linked and connected. When we change the context, we change the skill. So consider this. There is no such thing as running. There's running up a hill and running down a hill. There's running in a pair of Brooks shoes and running in bare feet. There's running on the beach and running on a track. There's running at high elevation and running cross country through the woods. Although elements of running are similar, the differences in context means that the skill of running is unique in each situation. So too is the skill of reading shaped by context. Reading a children's picture book is different from reading a recipe or assembling or directions to assemble a bookshelf. Reading Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone is different from reading Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point. When we change the context, we change the skill. Next slide. So building skills is like weaving a rope. Although we often use the term skill, in reality, there are multiple sub-skills that are working together. These are like the individual strands of a rope. Skill building for reading, writing, and mathematics involves intricate weaving of multiple strands of skill together. We first develop proficiency in specific contexts, and over time, these skills become overlearned and mastered across multiple contexts. Next slide. Some skill strands are easier to weave, and other strands are harder to weave, and they take more time. And weaving thicker skill ropes allows us to be successful across a greater variety of settings. Okay, next slide. So, in the balance of our time today, I'm going to share 5 big ideas for helping children build skills and to help them weave skill ropes to be successful in school and life. First, there are 2 types of skill, constrained and unconstrained. Second, both types interact with each other, but follow distinct developmental pathways. Third, unconstrained skills quietly drive school success and the achievement gap. Fourth, we need to help children and youth reach independent skill mastery faster. And finally, this is a 90-hour-a-week developmental challenge that requires school plus solutions. Okay, let's dig in. So, first, there are 2 types of skills. In 2005, a former University of Michigan professor named Scott Paris published the first of a series of papers in which he pointed out differences between 2 types of reading skills. He called these constrained and unconstrained skills. And over time, other researchers joined in and built upon these initial insights. And today, this is known as constrained skill theory. Now, we have constrained and unconstrained, our skills are characterized by some basic differences. Constrained skills involve relatively limited amount of information. Everyone works with the same information. Mastery is clearly defined, and the yardstick for mastery is the same for everyone. But unconstrained skills involve broad amount of information. Not everyone has access to the same information. There's no universal finish line for mastery, and always the opportunity to learn more. Next slide. So this is a group of constrained skills that I pulled together based on that support reading, writing, and math. I consulted research that explicitly focused on constrained skill theory, as well as research on reading development, writing development, and mathematical cognition. So for reading, there are 26 letters in the English alphabet, which if we consider differences between upper and lowercase letters, that comes to about 40 unique symbols. There are 44 basic sounds in the English language. There are a little over 240 ways that we combine letters to represent all of the combinations of sounds in English. But not all the words in English follow the phonics rules, as we know. So we have to learn to recognize about 200 to 300 irregularly spelled words. But once we can do all this and read at about 150 words, 50 words correct per minute, we've reached sufficient proficiency in our word reading skills that we can focus on reading comprehension. On the math side, we only have to master 20 symbols to decode almost any arithmetic problem we'll see before high school. Half of these are the 10 numerals between 0 and 9 that we can use to represent any number in existence, and the other 10 are all the symbols we use in math. Um, the standard addition table from 0 to 9 has 100 facts. The multiplication table through 12 has 144 facts. But when we remove the simple ones like zeros and ones and turnarounds like 3 times 7 and 7 times 3, we're left with about 30 unique addition facts and 36 unique multiplication facts. These are the constrained skills, and they are fixed, finite, and teachable. Next slide. So this slide shows you a group of unconstrained skills that support reading, writing, and math. And I've grouped them into 4 categories. Executive skills are the brain's air traffic control. They help us manage our thoughts, emotion, and actions, and they help us manage all of our skills, the constrained and unconstrained skills that you see here, and they all need to be able to work together. Uh, Next is conceptual world knowledge. These are maps for understanding the world around us. Spoken and written language. Those of us that are involved with early literacy are very familiar with these tools for communication. And then relational and structural thinking. These are sort of the underlying skills that we use to help solve problems. Next slide. Now, up to this point, I've talked about skills as either constrained or unconstrained, but in reality, they fall along a continuum of constraint. Some constrained skills are more constrained than others, and some unconstrained skills are more unconstrained than others. But for today's purpose, I'm going to talk about them as either constrained or unconstrained. Okay, next slide. So now we have 2 types of skills. Both are vital. They interact with each other to support proficiency and mastery in reading and writing and math, but each skill type follows distinct developmental pathways. So the constrained skills are relatively straightforward to teach. They're straightforward to assess. They're mostly learned in classroom settings, and most typically developing children learn these within relatively fixed timeframes. The unconstrained skills, by contrast, are not as straightforward to teach. They're not as straightforward to assess. They're learned both outside and inside the classroom, and these skills develop more slowly over time and throughout our lifetime. Next slide. So this is my absolute favorite model of reading. This comes from a professor at UC Irvine named Youngsuk Grace Kim. Her empirical research shows that reading skills are hierarchical, they're interactive, and they are dynamic. Hierarchical means that higher level skills are built upon more foundational skills. Interactive means skills work together. Some skills impact reading comprehension directly, and others impact reading comprehension through other skills. And then dynamic means that the individual contributions of specific skills to reading comprehension are not static. They change over time as overall reading comprehension develops, and they can change in response to specific reading tasks or demands. I've colored the skills in this chart by skill type. So green are the constrained skills, phonics, decoding, and reading fluency. And blue are the unconstrained skills, the executive skills, oral language, listening comprehension, knowledge, and reading comprehension itself. Both skill types are needed for proficient reading comprehension. Next slide. Now, even though we need both types to get to strong reading comprehension, unfortunately, some skills are easier to weave than others. They require more opportunity and support. These constrained skill strands are largely woven in the classroom, but the unconstrained skill strands are woven outside and inside of the classroom. Next chart, next slide. So we saw this chart earlier. This is the long-term trend version of the National Assessment of Educational Progress, or the NAEP, also known as America's Report Card. The main NAEP, which started in 1990, reports on what children know on a variety of subjects based upon current curriculum and standards. This includes the reports on reading and math for 4th and 8th grade that many of us are familiar with. But this is the long-term trend version of the NAEP. By contrast, dates to the 1970s. It's focused only on reading and math, and mostly for 9 and 13-year-olds these days. It includes about 7,000 to 9,000 children for each subject. And the long-term trend NAEP is explicitly focused on skills and is designed to give us a snapshot of what American children can do. This chart shows a persistent achievement gap across racial subgroups over almost a 20-year period. Next slide. Now, this explicit focus on skill level in the long-term trend version of the NEAT allows us to dive into constrained and unconstrained skills. On the previous slide, we saw reading skill scores by racial subgroups. On this side, we see a more nuanced picture. The chart on the left shows proficiency on simple reading tasks, a constrained skill. The chart on the right shows proficiency on simple inferential comprehension. This is an unconstrained skill. For much of this period, we've had about 90% or higher proficiency across all racial subgroups for constrained reading skills. But we've had lower proficiency for all subgroups for unconstrained reading skills. And the chart on the right looks like the charts we're used to seeing. It's the unconstrained skills that are driving more of the achievement gap in reading. Okay, so in the next slide, we see the same thing for math, the exact same gaps by racial subgroups for the overall skill score. And then on the next charts, we see the exact same pattern for constrained and unconstrained math skills. Next chart, next slide, please. So you see the exact same pattern over the same roughly 20-year period. Okay, next slide. So we all understand the importance of ensuring that our children and youth acquire skills to help them be successful in school, work, and life. These include what are referred to as durable, transferable, or transportable skills. We often see these included in portraits of a graduate at district or state levels. And of course, reading comprehension is important. So is the ability to write. Clear writing is clear thinking. And mathematical proficiency is also important too. This slide maps the relationships between the four groups of foundational unconstrained skills I introduced earlier and four groups of skills for school and post-secondary success. In many cases, this research I pulled this from describes the skills on the left as predictors of outcomes on the right. Next slide. Okay, so idea 4, accelerate independent skill mastery. Skill is not all or nothing. Our skill level constantly moves between what we can do independently, that's that blue line you see in this chart here, and what we can do when we have high support, that's the red line. Support can look like GPS when we're driving a car, a recipe when we're cooking, like when I made paella a couple days ago, or listening to a talk like this one. When you take away the support, our skill level collapses down to our independent level. You're likely to experience a collapse in your skill level regarding skill type and the science of skill building when you attempt to tell someone about this webinar in a few hours. When we provide high support to children and youth, we help them push the upper limits of their abilities. In other words, we help them achieve greater levels of skill complexity than they would be able to achieve on their own. This repeated process over time pulls up their independent skill level, or it pulls up that blue line that you see on the chart. This repeated process over time helps accelerate their developmental range. So what does high support conditions look like? Well, there's emotional engagement. We know that emotion is the rudder of cognition. You have to turn on the heart before you can turn on the mind. Structured activities, familiar tasks for practice, extrinsic motivation, which eventually our goal is for intrinsic motivation, and then co-development of skills with a knowledgeable other. Next slide. So idea 5, the 90-hour-a-week challenge. We all have the same 168 hours in a week. Researchers have actually examined how school-age children spend their time through examining time diaries. And on average, we see that school-age children spend about 75 hours a week eating and sleeping. And then they spend about 31 hours a week in school and about 62 hours a week on everything else. So these figures are for an entire calendar year. So they'll differ, of course, during the school year and during the summer. But I would argue that children and youth are more likely to have more common experiences during the 30 hours a week in school than the 60 hours a week out of school. And this is a key challenge because we know that constrained skills are mainly developed in school and unconstrained skills are developed outside and inside of school. The 30 hours are very important, but we can't solve a 90-hour developmental challenge with 30-hour school-based solutions alone. We need to use as much of the 90 hours a week as possible. This means we need to think about how to get the most out of the time children spend in school and out of school, And we need to think about the best ways to align formal and informal learning to support constrained and unconstrained skill building at the same time. Next slide. So there is some research to suggest what's possible. So I've summarized on this slide some findings from a study that was published in 2020. The researchers in this study explicitly looked at constrained and unconstrained learning activities at home. Taking into account child and family characteristics that are predictors of school outcomes, the researchers found a robust correlation between increased unconstrained language and math activities at home and children's growth in vocabulary and math problem solving. Moving from doing these activities 1 to 2 times a week to 3 to 6 times a week was associated with about 2 to 3 months of additional growth in vocabulary and about 2 months additional growth for math skills. The impact was even greater for children whose parents and caregivers did not have a bachelor's degree. And of course, vocabulary and math problem solving are unconstrained skills. And you can see on the in the blue boxes on the right what were the unconstrained language and unconstrained math activities that were involved in this study. Next slide. There's also a robust body of research on after-school programs that shows supervised practice can help children learn and apply new skills. Researchers found that after-school programs that have a set of characteristics have evidence of the positive effects on the right hand side of the slide that you see. These programs are characterized by the acronym SAFE: sequenced, active, focused, and explicit, and they're all focused intentionally around skill building. Sequence, connected and coordinated activities to build skills step by step. Active forms of learning used to help children develop new skills. Focus, at least one program component is focuses on skill building. And explicit, they target specific skills. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, children and youth are more likely to have greater differences in their experiences in the 60 hours outside of school than the 30 hours inside school. I created this chart using data from a longitudinal study that tracked about 18,000 American children. This is a statistically representative group from kindergarten in fall of 2010 through fifth grade in spring of 2016. Parents and caregivers were asked about children's participation in a range of extracurricular activities. These activities were organized athletics, organized performing arts programs, organized clubs or recreation programs like scouts, drama classes, music lessons, and art classes. In other words, these are exactly the types of programs that have safe-like characteristics that we just heard about. Now, this chart shows the annual responses organized by socioeconomic status. I broke the respondents into 5 groups or quintiles. The first row is the top socioeconomic group, and the last row represents children in the bottom group. And these columns are for each school year from kindergarten through fifth grade. The bars show the percentage of children in each socioeconomic group that participated in at least one of these 6 activities. Across the entire first 6 years of school, from kindergarten through fifth grade, roughly 9 out of 10 children in the top socioeconomic group participated in at least one extracurricular activity each year. And by contrast, for the bottom group, it ranged from about 3 to 5 out of 10 children across the entire first 6 years of school. Next slide. Schools are very important. If we didn't know this before the pandemic, we certainly saw it in the drop in achievement for reading and math for so many children. But just as important are the opportunities that children have for skill building and learning outside of school. As this great graphic from Karen and the Alliance for Youth Thriving shows, we need to build systems of opportunity within and across formal and informal learning to help children build constrained and unconstrained skills together. I look forward to hearing from our panelists, and I look forward to your questions in the conversation today.
Thank you, Monroe. And as you were absolutely on time, as you promised. And again, this is why I say he is brilliant and amazing. I've been doing this work for 55 years. And And I've been through that time, I really have been focused on how we can break down the conversation about learning to move away from the rigid academic and non-academic language. We have cognitive and non-cognitive. We have all of these ways of talking about learning that divide it in imprecise ways that favor the classroom over the larger learning environment. And what Monroe has just shared with us is the classroom setting is the most appropriate setting for building those constrained skills quickly. But if we don't then appreciate this larger learning environment where those skills get practiced and nuanced, you see the inequity that happens. And so, remember, I just want to thank you for that. And I want to turn now to Elizabeth to tell us more about how in North Carolina, your After School Alliance, your Center for After School has really been picking up on how we can help these more informal environments, these places where voluntary learning happens. Voluntary interest-driven learning is a very different kind of thing that happens than what happens in the classroom. And I also want to ask you, as you're getting started, how we're making sure we're taking full advantage of the learning that happens outside of the academic classroom, but in the school building and on the school grounds. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen. And thank you, Monroe. It was really lovely to hear all that information from you. As Karen said, my name is Elizabeth Anderson. I am the Senior Director of the North Carolina Center for After School Programs, and we are a statewide after school network in North Carolina who is focused on collaborating across sectors to advocate for equitable and high quality after school, summer, and out of school time learning, and supporting the after school field in our state. We work with makers, after school providers, education systems, state agencies, philanthropy, and others to convene and inform people about critical out of school time issues. Next slide. And we are based in the state of North Carolina, but good news for all of you who aren't is that we are a part of a 50-state after-school network, and there are after-school networks in each and every one of our states who do this important work. And we often collaborate on the national level with folks like the After School Alliance, whose data I'm going to share some. I'm going to share some of the After School Alliance data with you all today, and the National After School Association, which is the professional association for after-school educators. Next slide. And I feel privileged in North Carolina to be a neighbor of Monroe's. He's down the road in Charlotte from us, and was excited when I met him and got to hear him talk about unconstrained skills in this way because building unconstrained skills is something that we know in the after school space, we know we do often and very well. And so I'm going to talk to you a little bit today about how that happens, and also talk a little bit about why after school access matters for unconstrained skill development. Next slide. So Monroe shared a little about the hours that kids spend out of a classroom. The statistic I often use, and that honestly surprises me every time I use it because it's so much, is that children are spending more than 80% of their waking hours outside of a formal classroom when you include summer hours when they're not typically in school. And so formal and differently structured, I won't say unstructured, but differently structured after school and summer learning activities can actually provide students with years of additional unconstrained and constrained skill building and learning opportunities. An elementary school student who spends about 2.5 hours each day in an after school program will have an additional 2,775 hours of learning. And if they continue that participation through middle school, then that's an additional roughly 4 years of time learning in differently structured environments with informal educators, trusted adults, and their peers. Next slide. And research has shown us that that participation in after school programs is having a real impact on student learning. In one way that it does that is through addressing absenteeism and engagement in students by addressing two key reasons that students often disengage from the classroom. One, that school doesn't feel relevant to their lives. The way they're learning content in the classroom is not necessarily connected with their reality on the ground. And number two, students may not feel particularly connected to an adult in schools. After school programs are unique. They have a lot more flexibility and autonomy in the way that they deliver learning and structure their programming, and a lot of opportunity to exercise youth voice and choice in their environments. And they're also particularly great at building a sense of belonging among children by putting trusted facilitators that aren't necessarily teachers that are grading or testing them into a space that are there where they're able to facilitate learning alongside their peers based on student interests. Next slide. And in North Carolina, we're seeing really great impacts from that. 21st Century Community Learning Center after school programs are the federally funded after school programs in the US. And in North Carolina, we're seeing great outcomes from the students that participate in these after school programs. More than 50% of our fourth and eighth graders are showing improvement on their reading and language arts tests, and more than 80% are demonstrating growth in math. 82% of our first through 12th graders had improved attendance rates. Almost 50% had a decrease in in-school suspensions. And a whopping almost 90% of first through fifth graders demonstrate an improved engagement in learning as measured by their teacher feedback. Next slide. And the ways that students are reaping these benefits in after school are through a lot of different ways and a lot of different types of activities. This is based on data collected by the After School Alliance that show that parents nationwide say that in after school programs, 90% of students are building social skills, 70% access to healthy snacks and meals, 73% are getting homework help and engaging in hands-on STEM learning. 85% participating in physical activity, and then 68% learning life skills like the ability to communicate, and many of those unconstrained skills that we saw on Monroe's chart that he showed us. Next slide. And parents agree. When kids are enrolled in after school, they are engaged in real life and off screens. They're learning those unconstrained skills, social skills, responsible decision making, teamwork, critical thinking, leadership, and becoming more excited about the learning experience that they're having in the classroom. Next slide. And I'm going to quote an article from Youth Today, since we're here with both Karen and Monroe, that quoted Monroe that says, "After school programs are a great place for students to learn hard skills in soft places." After school programs, because they are differently structured and not beholden to the same constraints as the classroom, or have the same number of responsibilities and pressures that we're seeing in schools, they have opportunities to give students learning experiences that they can't have inside of school buildings. They provide students the opportunity to bring the things that they're talking about and learning inside of the classroom into another setting to practice and explore them and apply them in other contexts and situations. They have the independence and flexibility to curate student experiences. And importantly, these are a low stakes environments for students to take healthy risks and maybe fail without the pressure of grading or testing. Next slide. So that is the good news about after school. It certainly promises a lot in terms of providing this additional environment and structured support for students to build the unconstrained skills that support their classroom learning. The unfortunate reality, though, in the US is that we have a lot of after school gaps and barriers that we need to address. Next slide. In 2025, in the US, there were about 7 million K-12 children who were enrolled in after school, which left more than 22 million students in the US who wanted to be in after school programs but could not participate in them for whatever reason. So that's more than 3 in 4 children nationwide that want to be in after school but are missing out. Next slide. And that unmet demand, unsurprisingly, is highest among children in low and middle income families. You can see here that in low income families, 4 in 5 students are missing out as compared to 3 in 5 in high income families. Next slide. And what we see is that families who have the income to spend on out of school time are spending it and are spending about 9 times more on out of school time activities than low income families. So low income families are only spending about $734 on out of school time activities a year, as compared to high income families who spend more than $6,000 on opportunities for enrichment, sports, arts, theater, and other structured after school learning. Next slide. And cost certainly is the biggest barrier for many parents to enroll their students in after school. About 56% of parents nationwide say that after school programs are too expensive. Availability is also a challenge. 42% of parents report that programs are just not available in their community, and we see that a lot here in our rural communities in North Carolina. We have counties here in our state that have no after school programs available. And even in communities where they are available, many parents say that they're not in convenient locations for them to access. And about 49% of parents say that their children don't have a way to get safely to and from programs. Something we also often hear, I don't have a statistic here, is that program hours of operation don't necessarily meet the needs of working families. If a program ends at 5:30, but a parent doesn't get off of work until 5:30 or even at 5, and it's difficult to get across town, it can be difficult for families to access. Next slide. So what do we do to solve this problem? Next slide. Of course, the answer is through coordination and partnership. One of the beautiful things about after out of school time programming is that it's been and it always has been a very successful public-private partnership. After school programs are supported through a variety of funding sources, including federal and state public funding, local funding, and philanthropy. And that is the coordinating across these systems to support learning spaces and access to high quality out of school time learning spaces for kids is how we ultimately get access for them. Next slide, please. We do have federal funding sources for after school, as I mentioned, like the 21st Century Community Learning Center programs, as well as the Child Care Development Block Grant, which does fund school-age child care programs. But we also have disparities across state lines in terms of adequate support for out-of-school time opportunities. So 27 states across the U.S. do have dedicated funding streams for after school at the state level. Here in North Carolina, you can see on the map, we don't. And that leaves us disproportionately reliant on federal funds, which are becoming increasingly unstable, and philanthropic dollars, which are really hard for small programs with limited administrative capacity to access. So, one of the suggestions that we have and that we're working for in North Carolina is for state level funding sources that can be blended with federal and philanthropic dollars to make sure more kids have access to higher quality opportunities. Next slide. And the good news about this is politically popular with parents. So as we talk about solving the access and affordability issue for after school, we can do so confidently knowing that 90% of parents across the political spectrum support public funding for after school. And so with that, I will turn it back over to Karen to continue the conversation and happy to answer any questions you have as we move along.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. That was so efficiently presented. A lot of information. It's very powerful. And I hope that it just continues to help us understand the importance of not thinking about school and after school. The language itself of school and after school sets up a barrier that we need to break down. So if we're talking about how we can look for these opportunities to have unconstrained environments for learning, we need to find them in the schools. We need to find the people in the schools that are the counselors, the playground coaches, the folks who are in the school with young people and obviously offering extracurricular activities. Those are all a part of that climate as well. And so the more we can be looking at the learning experiences and the learner outcomes and looking beyond the setting where it's happening, the system where it's happening, that'll get us that greater integration. Libraries are a huge part of my life growing up. I spent every day after school in the public library reading. And if I didn't have those constrained skills built early, I wouldn't have been able to take advantage of my library. So it was a wonderful place for me to go. And I'm so excited to have Lex talk to us about the New York Public Library and what you're doing in this space. Because unconstrained skills happen in libraries. Library is the most unconstrained environment a young person can go into.
Thanks so much, Karen. I think libraries are deeply unconstrained places, much to perhaps the chagrin sometime of our staff. But I've been so inspired listening to my peers and am excited to share broadly what we're doing in New York that highlights unconstrained skills and what that looks like. So, Elizabeth, I really appreciated the way that you framed differently structured programs and soft spaces because I think that perfectly sums up the library. As Karen mentioned, my name is Lex Abenshaw. I'm the Director of Children's Programs and Services at the New York Public Library. We support approximately 90 branches across the Bronx, Manhattan, and Staten Island. Pardon my voice. It is allergy season, everybody. And my team and I support kids through the work of our branch staff. So that means we are training staff, designing programs, and ultimately working in conjunction with the folks on the front line to give kids opportunities to practice constrained skills, but really lean into those unconstrained opportunities. And so I really think of the library as the original unconstrained hub, just like Karen said. We are vital spaces of learning for our lifelong learners. And I saw some emojis. We've got other library folks here in the chat. And it is such a joy to be at the library because it is entirely voluntary, right? There's nothing compulsory about the library. And that is where we see these opportunities to really develop our passions, not just discover them. And so while schools often focus on constrained skills like decoding or your basic math skills, libraries help weave those thicker ropes of development because we are open to all and welcome everyone, right? We have that opportunity for 365-day engagement. I'm looking at the chat. Maker spaces are the best. And one of the examples I want to highlight is our NYPL after school program. So this is similar in essence and spirit to what Elizabeth has described, but it is a drop-in program. So it operates, excuse me, at 52 of our almost 90 locations, and it was built on the foundation of traditional OST programs. But we knew that there was something that didn't mesh well with who we are as a library. And that is that, again, voluntary nature of our programming. And so what we did was we removed this program from the community rooms or the basements where it was taking place. It was enrollment based. It served a small number of kids very well, but we weren't serving the kids who were out on the children's room floor. And that's where we saw so much of this opportunity to dig into these skills. And whether that is reading a book, we've had kids create magazines to highlight different holidays. It is truly child-directed learning within that safe, soft space of a library system. And so one of the things I think that is particularly powerful is this element of joy. Again, voluntary, but joy really makes us want to learn. And that is the power of these positive interactions that we have in libraries, at libraries, and spurs us into deeper and broader learning, right? We want to go broad, but we also want to go deep. And so my colleagues here have highlighted a number of these social opportunities and the importance of these durable skills. And that is absolutely something that we do at the library. One of the things that we've recently started offering is something we call reading rooms. You may say, Lex, that is a library. This is not news. And you're right. But we're carving out time and space for kids to determine who they are as readers. So we're hitting that read a book, unconstrained skill, but we're also giving them the language to talk about what they like as a reader, how they like to read, what's the environment that they're interested in when they're reading. And we've seen it pay off in such incredible dividends. We encourage kids to collaborate on murals that visually represent what they're reading and what they're learning. And it becomes a community art celebration at the end of a particular time, whether it's spring break, midwinter break, what have you. But it's something that stretches beyond the boundaries of a particular time frame, right? There's so much power in reading and reading together because it is truly a social activity. And Elizabeth noted this too, but the real opportunity here is in partnership. Kids are in schools, and that is such a critical part of our education, but to Monroe's point, there is a finite amount of time that kids spend in our classrooms. And so building the partnership connections and the ropes that bind us all together are so critical. We work in lockstep with our school system, which is quite large, as well as more formal OST programs. And it's through this larger ecosystem with folks who are dedicated to unconstrained skills that we are able to have true impact in our communities. And so I have a call to action for you today. And our ecosystem is so much stronger when we work together, whether that's in our cities and our towns, our states, or across national networks. And if you're not connected to your library, reach out. There's a wealth of resources and services to help kids drive these skills, discover who they are as readers and learners, and create things together. Um, Libraries are not a replacement for a classroom. We are absolutely the school plus solution that aligns both formal and informal learning, and we can build better together to help kids reach their flourishing state. And I will turn it right on back over to Karen.
Thank you, Lex. That was again wonderful. As we're talking about this, and you ended with, this idea that libraries are just wonderful places where learning happens, and in different ways. We really do need a language that helps us break down the boundaries between the systems. And libraries are a system. They're just a different kind of system. They're a system that's really embracing voluntary learning, unconstrained learning. They're set up differently, as are all the other systems that we've been talking about. But when we think about this, I keep going back to a quote from Remake Learning, from their piece called Shift. If you haven't read it, you should. It's wonderful about how do we really shift the mindsets. And Phil, you keep asking about how do we shift policy. We have to first shift mindsets, public mindsets, policymaker mindsets about what it takes to support learning broadly defined. And if we don't take Monroe and other people's brilliant definitions of how we redefine learning out of the way that we thought learning happened 50 years ago when I was sitting in classrooms, then we're going to always get back to this over-preferencing the constrained learning that happens in your academic classroom and not building up these other experiences. So the quote from Shift is, learning ecosystems are everywhere, but it takes careful stewardship to help them thrive. And so we're going to learn more from Lisa now about what it takes to get a thriving ecosystem going and how we think about striving and having stewardship in these broader contexts and what schools are doing in that space. So Lisa, tell us a little bit about the National Commission.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen. It's really exciting to be with all of you. And Monroe's just kicked off such just a vibrant conversation here, and just really pleased to be a part of it. What I'm going to do is quickly take you through a couple of slides that are introducing a new initiative that we're running at New America, but honestly is very much all about everybody that's on this call. The Campaign for Grade Level Reading is a big partner in this. Monroe and Karen are big parts of this. Many of my library friends are deeply connected to this. So I'm going to take you just through a couple of slides to explain what we're getting started here. You can go to the next slide. What we're doing is bringing together leaders to focus on place-based learning ecosystems. And it's a 2-year project funded, and our startup funding is from the Grable Foundation. So a big thank you to Grable Foundation for enabling this. And what we're going to be doing is looking at these kinds of ecosystems in communities, in regions or geographic communities. And we're making sure that these are places that are including all sorts of different, what we're calling sites of learning, and public schools are absolutely part of that. So I just want to put a big kind of +1 to what Karen mentioned a few moments ago about how important it is to have our public schools and our kind of out of school time environments working together. We can't do it without our public schools, but also our public libraries and our museums and our early learning programs and our after school and summer programs, our recreation centers, technology hubs. Love the makerspace conversation that we've been having in the chat. Public media stations are very much play part of this, especially in particular communities where the media station is right there and works with schools and educators, apprenticeship programs, post-secondary campuses and more, right? This is very much kind of an abundance agenda when we're talking about where our sites of learning are. So if you go to the next slide, I'll just quickly take you through what the work of this commission will be over the next couple of years. We'll be sharing lessons on what works. We'll be discussing challenges and investigating sources of pain points. Why is it so hard sometimes to make these connections, right? We'll be developing resources for tracking and measuring impact. Impact is really our big theme. We need to be able to, if we're going to make change happen, we need to make sure that the public and policymakers can see that this is leading to positive change and spark some strategies for communicating that impact, disseminating these stories of success. And then we'll have some policies at the end of our work, which will be at the end of 2027, to support healthy, equitable learning ecosystems and communities. And I just have to say that Monroe Richardson's work in helping us see unconstrained skills and how important they are is really helpful. It's like having a jetpack on this like rocket ship, right? That we're going to be able to like take this even further because of these ideas that are coming from the research, but that just haven't been communicated so easily and so accessibly before. So if we go to the next slide, I'll just quickly tell you a little bit more about the potential and where we see the connection to unconstrained skills in this. I think, I'm speaking to the choir here a bit and describing the potential of these learning ecosystems. I'm highlighting for you here this line around children and youth gaining durable and academic skills, of course, as well as a sense of belonging, stronger relationships in their communities, and a brighter future after high school. But highlighting the skills that our children, our youth, and our families are learning is, I think, also key to helping us change mindsets here. So if you go to the next slide, I'm just pointing out that in many ways, this concept, durable and academic skills, is really a way of thinking about unconstrained skills. And I need to and want to continue to adapt this based on Monroe's research and the research of many others of you who are here, because I'm recognizing even today that this is just not even enough of a way of talking about this, right? There's more to it than just these durable skills plus academic skills. So to be continued on that. So we can go to the next slide now. I'll just quickly going to take you through who's on this commission so you have a sense of it. We have more than 20 different national organizations. Big shout out to museums and libraries and the after school community, but also those who have been working on community school research, such as those at the Learning Policy Institute and the Campaign for Grade Level Reading and Connected for Kids. I see the Phillips here. So, so many different places we can connect. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see these are the regional ecosystems who are represented on this new commission. So this is just a way to show how we are pulling from leaders and innovators across the country, from San Diego up through like Delaware, New York City, we've got Wisconsin, we've got Little Rock, Arkansas on here, Dallas, Charlotte, North Carolina with Monroe's work through Reed Charlotte. If you go to the next slide, you'll just see some of the leaders named specifically in those the regional leaders who are going to be part of this work. We're going to be learning from them first and helping to kind of unpack where those challenges are and where those barriers are that need to be overcome by hearing from the folks who are doing the real work on the ground. And then the last slide or two just takes us to my own kind of unpacking why this is so important for literacy learning. We are recognizing more and more of like all the different components that go into making sure that our kids are strong readers. And when we think about the importance of these learning ecosystems and building those unconstrained skills, it's because they're helping to support reading comprehension, right? Getting kids out into their community to build that vocabulary and that kind of understanding of how things work. It's also about opening up opportunities for children who learn differently, for neurodiverse children, for those children who have different learning disabilities, and may work better in different kinds of environments than just sitting in a school classroom, so that they too are feeling like they're really achieving and growing. And then lastly, I think there's something really important here to tap into to support attendance and tackle chronic absenteeism. The more that we're making these kinds of learning environments available to our kids, the more that they're going to want to go to school, the more that their parents are going to see that school is a place where they can connect better to these kinds of environments. And I think this is where we can kind of pull on how schools and out of school time really do need each other and can be connected together. So that's the last piece. I think my next slide is just a way for others to get involved if you'd like. We're welcoming anybody who's interested in this to join us. We are putting together some communities of practice and some facilitated conversations that'll start this summer that will be including those on the commission, but also those that may not be on the commission but are wanting to share their lessons learned and also learn from others. So thank you. And Karen, back over to you.
Wonderful. This really is so exciting, and it's great to have so many of the folks that are going to be a part of this commission on the call with us today. Obviously, you picked well, both Siobhan and Lisa, in putting your groups together. But I want to pick up on your last comment about engagement and the connection between learning and engagement, the connection between unconstrained learning and engagement, and specifically share. I don't have a slide to put up, but we all know this. Engagement in school declines for every year kids are in school. When kids go off to kindergarten, you got 97% engagement. Young people go off ready to learn. By the end of fifth grade, it's down to 50%. By the time we get to high school, it's under 30%. Young people are mostly saying they're not engaged in what they're learning in school. So how does unconstrained learning, how does this idea of unconstrained learning help us tackle the engagement challenge? Monroe, we can start with you or anybody who wants to kick in.
Uh, Excellent question. I think a lot about sort of the conditions for learning, and particularly thinking about what we know about skill building. Kurt Fisher at Harvard and his colleagues did decades of work on what's called dynamic skill theory, which for me is really sort of the science of skill building, how are skills developed. And we know that emotional engagement is an incredibly important part. In fact, I would begin there. Kids who are not emotionally connected are not going to learn anything. It's true for any of us. Like if we're not emotionally connected, if I'm not emotionally connected with this work, it doesn't matter how compelling the research is. I'm not going to be motivated to like spend the hours and hours producing the charts that you saw. That's the same thing for kids. And so that emotional connection is important. We also know that social emotions, the connections, emotions from other people are huge drivers of engagement in learning and skill building, and really thinking about that is really important. Motivation is absolutely important. All of these we can talk about these separately, but emotion and motivation and engagement, they're all sort of combined together, and really attending to the conditions for learning and skill building is really important. And I would say that frankly, this is part of the superpower of organizations outside of the school system. It's not to say that it doesn't happen in schools or can't. I'm not saying that. But you don't necessarily have standards to follow. You don't have a curriculum to follow. You can follow the interests of children. Absolutely. Engage agency and choice is important. But you can create those high support conditions in a variety of ways, and have the flexibility that school systems don't necessarily have when you have to follow a curriculum or have to follow our standards or have a formative assessment system. There are opportunities to engage and connect with kids and help them discover what they're interested in, and explore those avenues in a variety of ways. And so that, again, I think this is part of the superpower and opportunity. And frankly, kids in higher socioeconomic households get this all the time, all the time. We've seen the numbers, you've heard the data, but kids in lower socioeconomic households, it's not for lack of ability or capacity. They just don't simply have the opportunities at the same way. And this is why I love so much the work of Karen and Merida at Knowledge to Power, the Commission at New America Foundation, because it's really about looking at ecosystems and how do we create ecosystems of opportunity for kids in lower resource environments, the same way that kids in higher socioeconomic households get all the time.
That's great. there's a phrase going around now, and Lisa mentioned the chronic absence problem, and it's called the new absenteeism. And by the time you get to high school, we need a different definition. You've got young people sitting in class. They're present, but they're not engaged. You've got young people who are not in class, but who are engaged in things outside in their community. So if we really want to understand how to tackle this problem and how to really get rid of the inequities that you see in your slides, Monroe, we really need to look at at where engagement is happening and follow it. Follow the young people where they are engaged, learn what they're doing there that allows them to be engaged, and then bring that back into the schools. It really isn't that schools are opposed to unconstrained learning. They're just not set up for it. And so we need to help them along. Let's get other folks in there and do put questions in the chat if you have them. But Lisa, tell a little bit about, you set this commission up for 2 years. What's the arc of what you think we're going to do over this 2 years to learn about how we can steward ecosystems better?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. This is, we got started in February and we will be starting to get together in person in April. And then the regional leaders, those 12 leaders that I showed up on the slide a few minutes ago, they're going to be kind of doing some deep dive projects and some research on their own in their communities with some funding that we have for them. So we have impact funds for each of the regional ecosystems to start thinking about how they're collecting data on impact. What does impact mean and look like for their community? And then what are they going to do with that data? How are they going to use that to evaluate what's working, what's not, to help build more kind of appetite for focusing on what works? And that's the first year. And then we're going to use that information to inform the policy recommendations that come in the second year. So, but we need all of it, right? We'll need all the input from not just the 12 regional ecosystems, but also from our national leaders that I'll be starting to see more and more. I think I predict more and more of this will be unfolding. This is just such an exciting idea. And we're hoping that these policy recommendations will have everybody's fingerprints on them, right? That there will be, people will really see themselves in the recommendations that we're going to be putting forward.
That's great. That's great. One of the things that I think is really important that you just mentioned is data, and we need different kinds of data. So a plug-in for Youth Today, we're really trying to track what's happening in this ecosystem space in Youth Today. It's a free publication. You can sign up for it. Those of you who are old probably remember it as an old tabloid that used to come into your mailbox, but it's still alive and active. There's a piece that I put in there talking about Big Thought, which is one of the Learning Ecosystem Commission's partners. And Big Thought in Dallas has really stepped away from saying, if we just do a program, we maybe serve 300 kids. But if we can figure out how we can take the programming that we know excites kids and sprinkle it through our entire community, through a network of organizations, libraries, parks, et cetera, we could get thousands of kids. And they have scaled this idea by saying, we're going to figure out what high quality learning experiences are. We're going to make them portable to take to other organizations so they can use them. We develop a network so they can really talk about quality and training and standards in our own way. And then we're going to track dosage. Do kids show up? How much do they show up? And do they gain? And they have done an incredible job of just talking about how you really can create a city of learning. That language of how we become a city of learning, not a system of learning, but a city or a community of learning is so important. I want to go back to the library folks just to say, I know Phoenix Library, I know the Nashville Library, they're actually leading in their spaces to talk about how they can, and obviously Monroe and Charlotte, but talk a little bit more about how libraries have moved beyond being places where you have to be quiet to being places where young people are allowed to be engaged.
Oh, Karen, that's my favorite thing ever. Um, I used to be a library manager, and our children's floor was on the first floor rather than the second, which is very standard in some of our spaces. And I often had well-meaning adults come down and be like, "It is so loud here. How do you handle this?" I'm like, "That's the sound of learning. That's what that, that's what that is." And I think ultimately, there is still that sentiment, right, that libraries can be places of quiet, but it is a community space. We have stepped fully away from being a crypt of sorts, a very, very silent, dour place. And libraries are genuinely for everyone. And that means finding that balance. Maybe you don't come on a Wednesday morning because you have toddler time and that is when kids are hanging from the rafters. But it's a negotiation and an invitation almost on a by community basis as to what that looks like and how it works for your community. I think one of the things I loved most as a library manager prior to this role was co-creating and what are the ways that we build our community together. That's kind of the theme, I think, of all the things I've said, but inviting them into the process so that they have a stake in what we do together, because if it doesn't work for my patrons, it doesn't work for me. And there's a balance to be struck there, but we are a repository for so many things, so many ideas, and that can't be quiet. We have to learn out loud.
That's great. Thank you. Let's go back to Elizabeth and talk about the out of school space. And there's a question about how we can better measure success in unconstrained skills. And I know out of school time, after school programs, rightfully for a long time, really resisted academic measurement from schools. Like we're not schools, we're not responsible for academic progress. But as we're breaking down the boundaries between academic skills, cognitive skills, social emotional skills, it took me 3 years with the National Commission, the SEED Commission, to get them to talk about academic and cognitive skills as two different things. Because we just say academic, social, and emotional skills, you're saying this is the important skills and these are the soft skills. And the language that we use is very important. So as we're talking about how we are measuring success in developing these unconstrained skills, and Monroe, your slide in which you said unconstrained skills are durable skills, they're literacy skills, they're competency skills, that's the way we need to talk about it. Those durable skills are a part of an unconstrained skill set that includes reading comprehension and writing literacy, et cetera. They're over there. They're the things we have to practice differently. So talk a little bit about how in your 50-state network, you're thinking about how we can update the way that we talk about the learning that happens and the growth that happens in after-school spaces.
Well, I think one unique challenge of out of school time settings is that it's varied and diverse, and there are a lot of different things going on and different activities that are going on. So you can't you've seen one after school program, you've seen one after school program, right? There's varying different types of activities that are taking place and varying level of quality that we see across the board. So I think one important piece that needs to happen in order for us to be able to measure these types of skills is to first of all agree upon what the skills are that are practicing and giving a language to it. I think that's one of the things that's really lovely about this work that Monroe has pulled together on unconstrained skills is it gives a language to the types of things that we know we've always known that we've been doing these in the after school space, and we think we know we're good at it. We see improvement in kids, but we haven't necessarily given the language to or agreed upon these things that we're going to measure. So I think one thing is that as a field is to agree upon which of these things we're going to track and how we're going to track them. And I think that also requires a degree of coordination across systems that includes our schools and school districts, that includes data sharing and information sharing about students, because we might see the students in different settings across the community. Sometimes after school programs are in school settings, sometimes they're not, but they're the same students, and they're everybody's students. And so I think that those are some ways that we can begin to move forward in terms of tracking impact on these specific areas.
Great. And when we think about learning and the connection of learning to skills, I keep going back to the power of us having everybody talk about learning and how learning happens, which we understand much better now. What skills young people are learning, and then back from your point of context is everything. Demonstrating a skill in a context is what needs to happen. Obviously, the confidence to demonstrate a skill, if you have it in a context, is driven by your relationships. If you don't feel safe, you don't feel supported, you don't feel known and recognized, you're not going to show that you have a skill even if you have it. And that happens to young people a lot of times. That's not equitable. And so as we're thinking about this, it's really so important to us to take advantage of the fact that portion of a graduate, that work that's going around the country, schools really are trying to say it's not just about your grades in reading, writing, and math. It's really about this broader set of competencies. The number of schools districts that have sort of brought their communities into a conversation about what are the broader skills we want our young people to have. They're combinations of durable skills. Over and over again, we're seeing it. It doesn't matter what the message is. Once we get to the skills that you need to have to participate in real life, you're on the right track. And so, as we're thinking about that, we really then need to come back to say, what are the experiences that get you those skills? And how do we track at the experience level? If we can stop just saying what program or how much time did you spend in a program and how much time did you spend in a learning experience, I think we'll get a lot farther in measurement to your question, one of the questions here. So other thoughts about how we can shift from saying kids spent time in this box to saying kids spent time in a learning experience that really was crafted for them to get skill growth. And did they get that skill growth? Does that help us move along in this space?
Are you asking
Anybody? Open
anyone?
question.
Can you repeat the question? I'm sorry. To help kids move, agreeing upon these things to help kids move how we're measuring.
Yeah. So let me try it again. We often name our programs by the topic. This is sports.
Yeah.
This is outdoor education. This is maker spaces. We don't name them by the skills that they're building in those spaces. And so if I say I'm in algebra and somebody else says I'm in whatever, you're not going to see that you could be using and building the same skills in both of those very different places. If we can get from naming the program and the type, the content to talking about the context and the actual experiences happening, I think we would get farther in helping us understand how we break the walls down between these things and actually get to the kind of unconstrained experiences that we need to have kids have. So that's just a thought. That's my thought, but that's my passion, Monroe. How do we really change our language to understand this is at the experience level that we need to be tracking? And that's where the differences are at that experience level. That's what accounts for those differences. One other thing, and I'll take this back to Elizabeth, in one of your slides, you said 4 out of 5 kids aren't getting the out-of-school programs that they need, but 2 out of 5 kids at the top quintile, or maybe it was Monroe's slide, are not getting the series that they need. When I saw that slide, I said, I don't think we're measuring them right. Because I don't believe for a second that young people in the top quintile of family income in this country aren't in some kind of skill building experience, unconstrained skill building experience. I don't believe that. They may be in a private music lesson. They may be in a ski lessons. They're doing things to build those skills. They're just not in things that we call programs. So how do we get to measuring skills versus programs?
Yeah, absolutely. So I agree with you. I think that that is all about how we defined at a school time program in that particular set of data collection. But I also think it's like a both and. I think that sometimes what draws students to a particular activity is their interest in the activity, right? So being able to have a student that's able to say, I'm really interested in theater or art, or I'm really interested in soccer. I'm really interested in basketball. Like that's maybe what draws the student in rather than talking about the specific skill. But there needs
Yep,
to be an effort to translate both for the student so that they can own the skill that they have learned.
exactly.
And so there needs to be some kind of, I think one of the things that support student learning is having adults who are trained and supported and able to help do that translation for students in the environment to help them understand what it is they're learning, and to support them carrying that forth to other contexts. And another piece of it is being able to translate that from the after school setting to other stakeholders that might not understand why playing on a basketball team matters, but do understand why being able to communicate, anticipate, work together as a team matters. And so I think that there's like a level there where we're able to still appeal to the kids based
Yeah,
on what type of program they're
absolutely.
in or what it is they want to do, to kids and families, but also to have the translator piece. And I think that's where intermediaries come in, actually, often, where we're able to kind of translate between the field of folks that are working directly with the kids who speak the language of the kids, and then also are, this other broader set of stakeholders who are very much impacted by kids' ability to develop these skills in various contexts, but don't necessarily know it. And so we're able to kind of play this role of being able to serve as the translator.
Yeah, absolutely. And in the SAFE model, the Durlock and Weisberg model that Monroe put up, the explicit skills is really naming them for kids. Naming you came here for basketball, you came here for photography, you came here to do your homework. But the skills that you're actually building and doing that are what we have to name. And young people love that. Keep putting questions in. We've got about 5 more minutes before we will move on. But let me just share an example of what I mean by that. About 10 years ago, I think, there was a study done of After School Matters, which is a huge after school program in Chicago. Um, Putting young people into apprenticeships, middle and high school students into apprenticeships with community people who are passionate about their work, artists, etc. And they assumed that these young people were going to be more ready for work. So they hired a researcher, Bert Harsh, Bart Hirsch, to come in and figure out how to measure this. Well, they didn't have jobs yet. So he went to employers and he said, I want you to think about the how you interview a kid for an entry-level job in your organization. What does that interview look like? And they set up interviews with the kids. So they set this up and they actually had the HR people in various businesses, local businesses, interviewing kids for an entry-level job that they did not need a college degree to come into, but they were in high school. They found to their disappointment, only 4 out of 10 kids were deemed employable. They said, how could this be? We've got all this great experience. We know they had this experience. How did they not see more employable? They went back and asked the HR people, what did you find? They said, well, we were asking them, give us an example of when you had to solve a problem. Give us an example of when you were in a conflict. Give us an example of when you had to really listen to somebody who was different from you. Give us an example of how you're using your skills. And they couldn't give them examples. Now, they had built the skills, they'd had the experiences, but they hadn't had the explicit translation of you're building this skill. So what Bart Hirsch did was he said, well, I'm going to come back. It's not that they don't have the skills, they just don't recognize that they have them. So he developed 6 little 45-minute sessions in which kids sat around together, no adult, and talked about a skill and what experience they had had in using that skill. And then they had them re-interviewed by the HR people, and it went from 4 out of 7, 4 out of kids being ready to 8 out of kids being ready. They doubled the number of kids who were ready just by having them understand the connection between the experiences that they'd had and the skills they had built. So the explicit part of that formula, how do we get explicit about telling young people what skills they're building and what skills they're needing? AI is helping us do this now in incredible ways to match the skills that young people have to the skills that they're going to need in a job or a context or a civic context to how they're going to find someplace to actually go practice and build that skill. That's all possible with AI. We need to do a much better job of that. Here's your engagement poll popping up on the screen. I'm going to give everybody a last round of comments on as we're wrapping up, and you're doing your engagement poll if you're a participant. So let's start with Lex. What would you like to tell people in your last minute with them?
Oh, last minute, that's tough. Um, I'm grateful for the partnerships in supporting all of the kids that we work with, and I think unconstrained skills are our way forward, and we will get there by building and strengthening our ecosystem. I put this in the chat, but I'm looking forward to connecting with everyone, including those in the chat, not just the panelists, uh, to do just that. So thank you all.
Wonderful. Elizabeth, we'll go back to you.
I am, I've shared this with Monroe before. I'm really grateful for for being introduced to this body of research because I think it gives us a new way to talk about things that our communities are already doing in a way that uplifts and elevates the value of what's happening in a lot of informal spaces for kids. So I am excited to know this work now, and what I'm going to commit to, and what I would encourage folks to commit to, is to bring this back to your communities to talk about the ways in which our informal learning spaces are playing a really important role in student success in these ways.
Wonderful. Lisa?
I I've gone back to, I think you helped us see this at the beginning, Karen, and I know Monroe has mentioned this as well, how important the mindset shifts are going to need to be around this work. And so the more that we can show real on the ground, tangible, very kind of active examples of like, this is what an unconstrained skill is, and this is why this is so helpful to these kids, and look at how they're thriving. The more that we're going to be able to help other people see that and shift their mindsets as well. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity and to just keep pulling out those examples and kind of lifting them up as much as we can.
Wonderful. Monroe?
Well, this has been like amazing. I've had the privilege of being on these webinars a few times, and I think this has probably been one of the most dynamic and engaging ones. It's been hard to keep up with the chat. I want to thank everybody for being here and for really engaging in this topic. Uh, So the original paper by Scott Paris, published in 2005, has been cited over 1,300 times. In academia, that like puts it in the top one half of 1% of papers. Researchers have been talking about this among each other for 20 years, but they forgot to tell the rest of us that are out in the field, like helping kids. And so I'm so excited that we're finally talking about this. And I would say, I think the big opportunity for us is to find really to think about ecosystems. How do we bring together diverse stakeholders, school systems, libraries, science centers, museums, arts programs, extracurricular programs, programs that work with families all together, discover common agendas across our differences, because we don't have to solve everything to begin to work on this, but to begin to work and intentionally give more children the opportunity to develop these critical skills. I'm really excited. I hope there are some folks who leave today on fire about this, and I hope if you are, that you'll reach out to the folks that you see here on the panel that are working on these issues in different ways. Thanks so much for being here, and thanks for listening and engaging.
That's wonderful. And my last word will be, don't give up on schools. Schools are doing an incredible job of trying to change as fast as they can. They are trying to change a 100-plus-year-old system that was not designed to do, before this research was done, it was not designed to do what we need young people to do today. So there are so many wonderful examples and networks. They're all in the commission: Education Reimagined, Remake Learning. Someone put in the Next Gen Learning Center, Learning Challenge. All these folks are collecting stories of schools that are doing this. It's not that we can't do it, but the equity question is huge. We've got schools that are breaking down the walls. They're doing wonderful things. At the same time, we have schools that just have kids sitting in desks doing worksheets. We've got to get this problem solved. And the mindset shift that Lisa mentioned is going to be important to that. Our out of school time partners, I think, have to be bolder in stepping up into this challenge. You can be ecosystem stewards while you're still building up a strong after school system. We can be these partners. And so I invite all of you to join the Alliance for Youth Thriving. It's not, it's just around these issues. How can we really come together differently to support the ecosystem? And the last thing I will say is, we have learned in doing interviews with folks that system leadership is different from ecosystem stewardship. They require different skill sets and mindsets and structures. And so in the paper that I dropped in the chat a while ago, you'll see 4 examples of very different but equally powerful ecosystem intermediaries that are not trying to build up programs. We're trying to build up networks of programs. They really are trying to say, how do we take learning experiences, get them to be really powerful, and then seed them throughout the community in every way we can, and then support them. It's a different thing, and both of those are needed. We need system leaders, we need ecosystem stewards, and we need these mindset shifts. So I'm going to hand it back to Michelle to wrap us up.
Thanks, Karen. I was just writing you all a note in the chat expressing my excitement, but thanks for letting me come back on, and thank all of you one more time. This has been just a terrific session, one of the highlights of my year. And I want to thank the folks we don't see on screen, Siobhan, who's been backing us all up in the chat, and Sierra, who always does such a great job producing. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. Have a great day.
Thank you.